Hey everyone, this is going to be a very informative video to not only show you our setup, but also just to share with you everything we've learned raising goats over the last 10 years, to give you things to consider and to help you make the right choices for you and your family. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is things to consider when buying a goat. The first thing that I really want to share is that I want you to go and actually see, look at my other floppy-eared goat. You know, and the first thing of that is when you find one, most likely you're going to find it online and ad for it. I want to encourage you to actually go to the seller's farm and go look at the goat yourself. You know, some sellers will be eager to want to meet you somewhere, and you know, that's all good and well, but I think it's so important to see the farm and see, you know, how the goat was raised, and you're really not going to get that kind of idea on the goat unless you actually go there to it. As inconvenient as that may be sometimes, they're, you know, pretty long drives to get there. But because you know, there was one time we pulled up, you know, the goat looked good online, and even the pictures of the background, they looked really nice. But then we got there and it was just that goat was on a dirt field. There wasn't a blade of grass anywhere to be seen. It was on a, I remember the guy brought out like a box of animal crackers to get it to come to us, and anyway, so there were just a lot of red flags about that goat, and we just left. It just wasn't for us. So I think it's important to, you know, to go to the seller's farm and, you know, just see for yourself the conditions how they raise their goats. The next thing is the behavior of the goat. Like, I want to have, especially if it's a young goat, I want it to be inquisitive and curious, spunky and playful. You know, and then the older goats, I mean, I still want them to be able to come up to me, you know, to check me out. And if you've got one that's just kind of laying off by itself, I mean, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it would be something to kind of raise a red flag to investigate a little bit further. So I want goats that are active, you know, and you can just tell a lot just by their body posture, you know, if they feel good or if they're, you know, not. So just kind of seeing how they behave is important. Yeah, the third thing to consider when buying a goat is its physical condition. I mean, there's so many things to check for when you're buying a goat besides its physical behavior. And, you know, and so really for me, the first thing, as long as they're acting okay, I mean, you can kind of look at them like, I want a goat that has, you know, a soft, smooth coat. You know, sometimes, and our goats will get it too, where they get mites or lice or something, and you have to treat that. But look, if their coat's like kind of, here, come in here. So like her coat's really soft, but like sometimes you'll see goats and their hair will look like they've been biting on it, you know, and a lot of times they'll get mites and stuff, you know. But this goat, she's a young one. She was born this year, but she's been a really healthy goat, you know. So another thing to look at is, you know, besides their coat, is you know, their eye color. And hers is okay. It could be a little bit better, but if you can pull down their eyelids and see underneath it how it's pink, you know, that's what you're looking for in a goat. If it's white, you know, it's a sign of anemia, and most likely it's a parasite problem, although there are lots of other reasons that a goat, you know, could be anemic. So, but something to check is you really want to see that pink color, and sometimes you can, you know, look at their gums. And, you know, the gums to me aren't the best indicator. You know, there's a lot of talk about the FAMACHA scoring, you know, and that's a good tool to use when you're evaluating a goat, but I would not let that be like the 100% deciding factor on whether it's healthy or whether it needs to be dewormed or not. Because, I mean, I've had several goats that I can pull down their eyelid and they could be a 4 in the morning, and then I can pull it down, it could be a 2 in the evening, you know. So there's other things that go into it, you know, but it is a good starting point to check them. And we'll talk about dewormers and fecal testing and all that later in the video. But eyes are definitely one thing to look at. You know, another thing is going to be their weight. You know, and some breeds are just they're built different. And then also with age, I've got a couple that are older, and so they're starting to, you know, show some signs of aging in the way they carry their weight. But you don't want, you know, a real sick, skinny looking goat. I've got one out here somewhere that she was sick a few weeks ago. She's better now and she's gaining weight, but we had to treat her with some medicine, and she just hasn't quite put on her weight yet. But it was signs that you could see that she was recently sick. But again, she's getting better. So just kind of check their weight, and then really, you know, as gross or disgusting as it may be, is look at their butt. You know, you want to make sure that there's no signs of any loose stool or diarrhea that it's had in the past. You know, and so it should just be nice and clean. You know, if there, you know, are signs of diarrhea, then, and again, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's something to, you know, ask questions about and dig in a little bit deeper. Let's see what Puddin's butt looks like. You know, lift up their tail, you know, and hers is pretty clean. Look at Buddy's butt. Now there's a butt. So as far as the physical characteristics, that would be the most important things. Another thing to consider is, you know, some people do herd testing. You know, so there's CAE, there's CL, there's Jonas, there's tuberculosis. Those are probably the 4 most common tests that people do. I've talked to a few vets, and honestly, one, I don't know any, all the testing that we've ever done, everything's always come back negative. And honestly, I don't know of anyone that's had a positive test for any of those things. But I was talking to my vet last year about it, and he was talking about how there's like either a lot of false positives or false negatives, you know, and so he didn't sound too confident that those tests would be a definitive yes or no as to whether it has or not, because sometimes they can carry the disease but not show any signs of it, or it may not even show up in the blood work early on in it. So, you know, that's kind of a tough one. I would say that if they have had the testing done and it all came back negative, that would definitely be a plus. But if they haven't done the testing, you know, to me that's not necessarily a big deal. And then honestly, if you think about it, if somebody has a herd of goats and they go get them tested, if it came back positive for anything, either when you ask about the test, they're either going to say, yeah, I took it, they were all tested and they came back negative, and then you ask, can you see the paperwork, and they conveniently won't have it, or they'll just, you know, say, we never haven't got our herd tested. I couldn't imagine anybody, you want to think people are honest, but if they've got a positive sick goat and they're trying to sell it, most likely they're not going to disclose the truth of that anyway. So, you know, so sometimes, most of the time, I don't even ask for that, because it's just one of those things. If you really sit there and think about it, unless you know the breeder, which is a very important thing, you know, is to check the reputation of the breeder that you're buying from, and then you just have to make the best decision. You know, and how you want to think people are honest, but unfortunately, some people try to sell off their sick goats just to make a few bucks and rid their herd of the problem goat. And sadly, they just pass on those poor genetics and diseases onto another person's herd, and then it becomes their problem. So anyway, testing is good. That's not another deal breaker for me either when I'm purchasing a goat, unless it came back positive and they actually shared that. You know, another question that's important to ask is about its deworming schedule and vaccine. And again, deworming is a very opinionated and controversial subject. We are minimalist when it comes to that sort of stuff. So, you know, we do give a CD&T vaccine every year, but other than that, that's the only vaccine we give our goats. And then when it comes to deworming, because we have a small herd, we only have 11 adults right now, and so we can keep an eye on them, and we can individually treat a goat instead of doing like a blanket application for a herd. And so the only goats that get any medicine are the ones that need it. You know, we've been dealing with like a lot of parasite resistance, and a lot of bad practices are kind of contributing to that, which is making it tougher. So, but again, if you've got a goat if you're purchasing a goat, and you know, and some, it drives me crazy because even on some of the vaccine, I mean not the vaccines, but on some of the dewormers, you know, it'll say give this, you know, once a month, you know, year round. And I don't know why they say that, because I mean, to me, that just common sense should kick in. And if you're treating the same thing, eventually that's going to speed up the process and contribute to parasite resistance for that drug. You know, and unfortunately for goats, not being a huge industry, there's not a whole lot of new medicine in the works. You know, and so, and a lot of veterinarians are kind of, they have their different opinions too, but you know, and we're all doing the best we can to manage parasites, but a lot of it is now like mixing different classes of dewormers, and doing like 2 or 3 different classes all at one time. And we've had to do that, and that's worked out pretty good, but there's some that, you know, are just completely ineffective. And again, we'll talk about the deworming later on, but it is good to know how they were cared for in that aspect. And but if you've got a goat that's been dewormed regularly, or if it needs several treatments a year, you know, that's kind of a red flag to me. You know, we breed our goats for healthiness and for as parasite resistant as we can get in goats, you know, along with, you know, their temperament and their milk production. So anyway, but that's something to ask. And then also, as far as how it's raised, like what's their feeding like? Are they on pasture? Are they in the woods browsing? Or are they on like a dry lot where they're just getting grain and that's the only source of food they get? For us, I mean, you know, this is one of 6 areas that we rotate our goats between. This one happens to be mostly grass, which, you know, ideally I would put them in the woods. But they've kind of eaten down our woods for now, and so this is the best pasture to put them in as we get into late or early fall. But if they've been raised on a dry lot, then you know, typically those are really healthy goats as far as when you check them out, because all they're doing is eating processed grain, you know, out of a bin, and so they have very limited exposure to parasites. And so when you introduce a goat like that into a system like the way we operate, because there are parasites everywhere, you know, you can't eradicate them. And so a lot of times those goats would be the ones, just because they haven't developed a strong immune system for stuff like that, that they're going to get sick and be problematic in the future too. So again, their feeding schedule is definitely something to consider. So another thing to consider is going to be, are they registered or not registered? I mean, obviously, if you have if you're buying a registered goat, then they have the paperwork, and you can, you know, trace back their lineage, and you can see, like, you know, as far as their again, for us, we raise dairy goats, so we can see their dairy genetics in their previous generations to kind of make an educated decision as to whether we think it'll be a good future producer for us. And again, the paperwork, that's not even something I really personally care about. If I was doing this to raise the babies and sell them for money, then you know, that would be something to consider, because it is going to make your goats more valuable. But just because they have a fancy piece of paper, it doesn't mean they're going to be any better milkers. So again, we've been doing this for 10 years, so I feel like we have a pretty good idea as to what we're looking for when we see a goat for sale, if we're in the market to buy one. You know, and we know enough people now that we can, you know, find reputable breeders, and we just know the right questions to ask. And then you know, some of it is just using your judgment and trying to decide, is this person telling me the truth or not? And which again goes back to paperwork too. Just something to think about is, again, you want to trust everybody and think everybody's honest, but if I've got a herd of goats and I've got some registered and unregistered, who's to say I can't take a baby from this non-registered doe and register it under my registered doe and say it was hers and then sell it for more money? There's no way on earth, you know, anyone would get caught doing that. And we've bought some registered goats in the past that, I don't know, we paid good money for them, and they just ended up being some of the weakest and sickest goats. Maybe that's what happened to us, or maybe it's just the way it went. You know, but again, just because they have a piece of paper, it doesn't mean they're going to be a better producer or healthy or any of that. So again, for us, registered or not, it doesn't really matter too much. I mean, if it has papers, I'd say it's a plus, but not a definite make or break deal for us. And the last thing I want to talk about as far as like buying a goat is, well, one, what's the purpose of it? Are you raising it? Are you going to buy it for dairy or meat production? Do you just have a wooded area that you just want to clear out, or are you looking for a pet? You know, and that's going to vary greatly on their price. I mean, you can get here in Central Alabama, you can find a pet quality, brush quality goat for $50 to $150. Dairy goats, I've seen them from $200 all the way up to $800 or $900. Meat goats, I don't know a ton about, but I was talking to a guy a month ago that raises them, and he was into the thousands on some of his goats that he bought, which is hard for me to fathom paying that much for a goat, but he seemed to know what he was doing. So, but anyway, so they can get expensive, and so I guess that would be the main thing, is know what you're buying the goat for, and you know, don't rush into it, and certainly just don't overpay for it. If you've got a seller that they're bragging about their goats, but they've really got no proof about it, you know, my personal experiences, a lot of times they're just full of it, you know, and they put a higher price tag on their goats way more than it's worth, you know, and you don't want to overpay for anything. So, but some of that's just discerning and reading the situation and knowing if that person is trustworthy and honest and reputable, or if they're just trying to find a sucker to buy a sick goat. So those would be my advice for if you're considering buying a goat. So the second thing I want to talk about is having a setup that works for the purpose of the animal. Again, for us, we raise dairy goats, and so for us it's important. We have one central milking area on our farm, and so I need to be able to rotate all my goats around that, but also in the springtime and early summer when they have kids that we need to separate, that we can easily pull out the moms and put them in a small pen so that we can milk them in the morning and put them back with the herd throughout the day, and then we just do that again. If you don't have a good setup, it makes it a lot of work, a lot of aggravation and frustration, and that can really take the joy out of it, and it can cause you to get burned out and just fed up with it, and you just quit altogether. So I'd encourage you to think about your particular farm or house and your land situation, and how can you make it as convenient as possible to be able to do that. And again, we have 6 areas that we rotate our goats between. And so this is one that's about 3/4 of an acre that they're in right now. We'll keep them in here for 2 or 3 weeks. And it all depends on the season, and are we getting rain? Is grass growing? Right now we're in a dry spell. But the grass, we've let this area rest for a while. So this is the best area that we have to put them in now. But they'll be in here for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll rotate them around. And so that way, ideally, if you can let land rest for 2 months, it's going to help with your parasite management, and just letting that, it's going to be healthier for your land altogether, just letting it rest, letting whatever parasites they did shed, hopefully they'll run through their cycle without any host and they'll pass away. And so by the time you move them back around 2 or 3 months later to an area that hasn't been grazed, that's going to be your best bet for managing and controlling parasites in your herd, and just keeping your goats healthy. You know, and then with your layout too, something to consider as far as making it easy is having a easy way to drag a hose or to get water and food to them, where you can get clean water every day. That makes, you know, life so much easier when you don't have to, you know, hook up 5 hose pipes to get it somewhere. So, and that's the way our setup is now. I've got one hose pipe that I can stretch around to all the different locations that rotate around our milking area, and it works for us, and it's been a pretty simple process doing that. You know, and another thing is like shelter. For us, this is the only pen that they have that doesn't have shelter in it. And again, we're in a dry spell. We're not expecting rain for at least another couple of weeks, and we haven't had rain in a couple of weeks. So, but at least my goats, maybe I baby them too much, but they absolutely hate getting rained on. And so anything that you can do to minimize the stress of the goat's gonna overall help it with its health. You know, and so if it's gonna storm or something, I would move them out of this pasture and put them somewhere where they can, you know, get out of the rain. And then in the winter months, when it gets a little bit colder, the next place that we'll rotate them down to actually has access to a barn stall, and it protects them really well from the wind, obviously the rain, and we can, if we need to, we can put heat lamps in there, and that'll keep them warm and dry and just protected from, you know, the elements. You know, and then the last thing as far as your setup is your fencing. I know some people that run the electric fencing, either like 4 or 5 strands. Some people use the electric netting, and those both work, you know, really good. For us, we use field fencing, and then we run a single top strand of barbed wire on our perimeter. And you know, I know a lot of people say goats are escape artists. In the 10 years, I have never had a goat get out of that. Sometimes they'll put their feet up on the fence, but the barbed wire kind of deters them from doing that. You know, and that's what works best for us. Again, for those of you that don't know, we have 4 Airbnbs on our farm, and so we have a constant flow of people coming onto our farm. Many of them have little kids. And so just from a safety standpoint, like, I don't want some kid that's never been around electric fencing to just go up and grab a hot wire. You know, and so that's one of the reasons that we stick with the field fencing. You know, and again, we've had great success with it, and we've just never had an issue. It's easy to repair if a tree falls on it or anything, and it works for us. But again, I know a lot of people that use electric netting or the you know, 3 or 4 strand hot wire, and they have good success with that. You know, but whatever you do, just make sure, one, that it's good enough to keep your goats in, but it's also good enough to keep any predators like neighbors' dogs, depending on what part of the country you're in, whether it's foxes or coyotes or bears or bobcats or mountain lions. You know, whatever your predator is, make sure you have fencing that's adequate for that. And you know, another thing, we don't necessarily deal with it because, again, having the fence that we have set up, it's going to keep any dog or anything like that out. It's really any predator that we deal with here in central Alabama. I mean, yeah, there's an occasional black bear sighting and some bobcats, but you know, we've been here for 6 years, but we've been raising goats for 10 from our other place, and it's just something that we've never had an issue with. So, so having this field fencing with the barbed wire, it's good enough for our area. But again, if you've got some other predators that we don't deal with, something to think about and consider. All right, so the third thing I want to talk about is their nutritional and maintenance practices that we use here on our farm. As far as their diet, all of them get a dairy goat specific feed. It's a non-GMO feed that we get. You know, and it's got most of the vitamins and supplements they need. I wouldn't call it, it's called a complete feed, but I wouldn't label it a complete feed. So in addition to the dairy goat feed, you know, they also get either alfalfa hay or pellets, whichever we have, beet pulp. I put a little bit of olive oil mixed in with it. And then they'll get some, we buy round bales of hay for the winter months. And then as far as the supplemental stuff, because we had, actually it was this goat right here. She had, she miscarried, or I say miscarried, yeah, it was an early birth. But anyway, but the 2 that came out were both stillbirths. That's the first time we've ever dealt with it, you know, so obviously it had us concerned if we're dealing with like a disease, or is it just a nutritional deficiency, or, you know, what it was. So we did a lot of testing on her, and we actually sent the fetuses off to a state lab, and they did an amazing job of, I mean, such a detailed report too of everything. And I guess fortunately everything came back fine on the fetuses, which is kind of nice if, you know, you get something that kind of pinpoints it to what the problem was. But so then we started doing tests on the mama, and the only thing that came back, none of the diseases were present. You know, the only thing she really had was just a selenium deficiency. And again, she had a lot of blood work drawn and tested, and again, very thorough. from the doctors that we used on that. And we kind of spent more than I typically would, but I'm one of those people that I like to learn and you know, grow in whatever I'm doing. And so it was you know, it was more money that we spent on her than she was actually worth as far as buying a goat. But it was a good educational experience for us to learn about all the different things, you know. And so anyways, selenium was the thing that she was deficient in. So, you know, and he said most likely if one's deficient, they're probably all deficient. So we started adding a vitamin E and selenium supplement to their diet that they get once a month, you know, and so far we've had good success with all that. And then they get copper boluses 3 times a year. And then as far as their hooves, we've got some goats that just genetically, they have really good feet. They don't need their hooves trimmed more than, you know, a couple times a year. And then I've got some, well, the white one behind me, she has genetically bad feet. And so we have to trim her hooves about 6 or 7 times a year. You know, so those are the main things, you know, that we do for their diet and to keep them as healthy as possible. You know, and then the last thing as far as their nutritional maintenance practices that I want to talk about is going to be the deworming. And, you know, and that's something, again, I've talked about this a little bit earlier in this video, but we're minimalist when it comes to that. You know, I really want my goats to be able to fight off parasites, and you're not going to eliminate 100% of the parasites. They're going to carry some load. It's just whether it's a healthy or unhealthy load. So I watch my goats. If I feel like they're sick, you know, we'll do testing and stuff and see. But, you know, and again, we do our own fecal testing here. And so, you know, I know exactly how many eggs per gram they're carrying. It determines whether they get any kind of treatment for that or not. And so we'll go into that, the details of that in just a minute. It's important to know your eggs per gram count. For us, if it's over 1,000 eggs per gram, that's when we deworm. But sometimes it's less than that and we just let them be. But we keep a close eye on them. But also the good thing about that too is if you're doing your own fecals, if you can test them before, whether you do it or send it off to a vet for them to do it. If you know that eggs per gram before you treat them, and then when you treat them, because again I talked about parasite resistance, whatever you deworm them with, then you test them 2 weeks later after that, and you find out the real numbers of is this dewormer effective or not. I think ideally you want like about a 90% or higher reduction in your egg count from a dewormer, and less than that, then you're starting to see signs of parasite resistance. There's some dewormers out there on the market, like the fenbenazoles. They do little to nothing for us out here. That's one that's been, I think, mostly overused. Ivermectin's becoming the same way. And so there's a lot of parasite resistance out there. And knowing not only the type of worms you're treating, but what you're treating with, is it effective or not, is going to help. If we can all do that as responsible goat owners to try to slow down and reduce the amount of parasite resistance that we have. But unfortunately, I think it's a little too late, and it's already a tough battle with parasites. And so really the best thing for that is preventative maintenance and care, and just keeping your goats as healthy as possible. But let's go down to where we do our fecal test, and we'll walk through that process. So in raising goats, really the single most important thing is parasite control. And the best technique and tool that we have to do that is to do our own fecal samples and fecal test. So I'm going to demonstrate the modified McMaster's fecal egg counting technique. And I got this from the North Carolina State Extension Service. So as far as things that we need is a fecal float solution. Obviously this is something I made myself. And on their website they have the directions on how to make that too, which we can put the link for this website in the description below. And we'll need 26 milliliters, which I already have measured out. And then we need 4 grams of feces, which I have here already weighed out. We'll need a pipette, we'll need a strainer, and then we also need these McMaster fecal egg counting slides. And again, we'll put a link for where you can purchase these. And then also, obviously, we need a microscope, which is over here in the cabinet. So as far as for this technique, what we're going to do first is we're going to take the 4 grams of feces, we're going to add the 26 milliliters of the salt solution in there. And then we're going to use this popsicle stick, tongue depressor, whatever you want to call it, and kind of chop up all the pellets and to get it to mix really good. So we're just going to break everything up in there. All right, so now that we have the 4 grams of feces mixed in good with the 26 milliliters of the salt solution, I'm going to take the vial that I poured the salt solution out of, and then I'm going to use this strainer over it and pour that in there. And then we'll just stir it around and get all the salt solution down. And so now that we have that strained, and we're going to discard the feces in there, and then I'm going to take this pipette and I'm just going to stir it around for a few seconds. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw off the top of the water, or the top of the salt solution, to fill the slide, because the eggs have a certain amount of weight, and with this salt solution they float in it, so they're going to be, the higher eggs are going to be at the top. So I'll depress the pipette, put it in there, suck it up, and then I'll fill up the slide. And really, as long as I have those grids covered, and then and then I'll repeat that process again. And so now I've got the 2 sides, they're both filled, all the grid lines are covered, there's no air bubbles in there. And so we'll take this, we'll give it a minute for those eggs to float up in the solution, and then we'll put it on the microscope and see what we've got. So what I'm going to do here is work the slide up and down and back and forth as I go up each chamber and count the eggs in there. And since I've got 2 sets of chambers, I'm going to count those, add the total together, multiply that by 25, and that's what's going to give us our eggs per gram. So, and with this microscope, I set it on a 4x magnification, and I'll actually focus in. There'll be like some little tiny air bubbles, and if I can focus in on those, that's generally about the level where the eggs will be too. And so I'm just going to go up and down and count the eggs. All right, so in that first set of chambers, I've got 9 eggs. And so now I'm going to move it over, and I'm going to repeat that same process for the other half of the slide. And I'm going to count those and see how many I have. And normally, it depends on how many eggs, but they're normally pretty close. So on both slides, one side I had 9, the other one I had 7. So that gave me 16 eggs. I multiplied that by 25, and that's what gave me 400 eggs per gram. It's something to watch the goat, but I'm not going to deworm this goat right away, because that's not really that high of a number. It may sound like a lot, but it's not. Like I said, normally I'll deworm if they're over 1,000 eggs per gram. But with this goat, what I'll do is I'll just monitor them and just keep an eye on them and see how they do. But as of now, the goat's acting fine. Everything seems good. Good color still. Slightly higher eggs count than what I would prefer to see, but again, nothing alarming. And so I'm going to wait on this goat. So let me see if I can zoom in, and I'll show you what I'm looking for. Yeah, so what I'm looking for in these slides is what you see right there in the middle of the screen. That's a strongyle egg, which the main cause of death in anemia in goats is a barber pole worm, which is a type of strongyle. And so that's what I'm really counting. Some of the other worms, they don't even show up in a fecal test. But this is the one that's the main cause for concern in your goat herd. And as far as what else you see on that slide, so that little spot below it, that's just some debris. And then those little black circles with the light dot in it, those are just little tiny air bubbles. So nothing to be concerned with there. But yeah, but that right there is what I'm looking for and counting when I'm scrolling up and down these chambers to see. And to see it at this magnification, that's switched it to a 10x, so got you a little bit tighter in there. But again, when I'm counting eggs, I put it on a 4x, and then that way I can see like the entire from blue line to blue line on my slides. and it just makes it easier to count them. So the fourth thing that I want to talk about is our breeding schedule. And I say schedule, it's really not much of a schedule. It's our strategy, I guess, is we normally bring in a new buck every other year, and we'll retain doelings, and then whichever, we normally keep 2 or 3 doelings per buck, and then we sell him, and then we bring in a new buck every other year. And so this year we brought in Buddy here, and most of our goats are Nubians, but we do have one La Mancha and one La Mancha cross, and Buddy is a La Mancha. He's actually registered, which again, I talked about that. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but it's something. But so far he's been a good one, and again, he was healthy. He's still healthy. Again, went to this farm, talked to the owner. He's just a super chill buck. He was easy to load. He's a big guy, but I think he'll be a good one. And he actually had good genetics for dairy production. He checked all the boxes for us that we were looking for in a buck, other than the fact we really wanted a good Nubian buck, but we just could not find one within a reasonable drive of here this year, and so we got Buddy here. But again, great genetics, and that's huge. But also, again, we have Airbnbs. We have lots of kids that come out here that have 0 to little farm experience, and so it's important for us too that we have animals that are like this. I mean, a little kid could probably sit on him and he'd probably walk off, but he wouldn't react too much to it. But he's just a super chill buck. I think he's bred pretty much all our does this year already, and so he's just kind of hanging out, and he'll cover them again next month if any of them come back into heat. But yeah, he's just easygoing, good milking genetics potential that I would say that he'll pass on. He's a little bit bigger than all of our does, which we wanted to add some size to our herd anyway. So we'll see what spring of next year gives us. They're all bred for late February, early March babies. But as far as our strategy goes, and so as far as breeding goes, we have one unrelated buck to every doe that we have. And so that way he can just stay with them year round. It reduces us from having to have an extra buck pen. And, it happens when it happens. He's going to be happier because he's, with his herd. And again, he's a super chill buck, and all of our bucks have been really good. We're pretty picky, when it comes to what bucks we bring in and what genetics we decide to introduce to our herd. And so, so far he's been a good one. And we'll see how this year goes as far as what he throws. Because he's not a Nubian, I don't think I'm going to keep him for 2 seasons in hopes that I can find a Nubian buck for next breeding season. But we'll see. He may stick around a little bit longer. All right, so you've got your goats. You've got them healthy. You've got your setup the way you want it. They're bred. Now comes to me the most exciting part of owning the goat is the pregnancy and the birthing time. So normally our does will be bred sometime around September, October, and generally in the past, all of our does within a 2-week window, they all come into heat, they get bred, and then 5 months after that, which is the gestation of a goat, they'll all deliver within that 2-week window. And so this year we're looking for babies in late February, early March. And since ours are dairy goats and we do milk them, we normally like to dry them up 3 months before they deliver. So that'll put us drying them up in November of this year. We've got tons of milk in the freezer that we've saved up like for our soaps and stuff. And we've got some friends down the road that have a dairy cow that just calved, and so she's producing a ton of milk that they're just trying to find a home for. So we're actually letting our goats dry up a little bit earlier this year, and just because we don't really need the milk right now, and it's just easier, and hopefully it'll help with our goats' health too, that they're not having to grow a baby and produce milk. They can just concentrate all their nutrients and energy on hopefully growing healthy babies. You know, and so, but again, normally we do dry them up 3 months before, but this year we're going to dry them up, you know, 3.5 or 4 months before their delivery. You know, and now when it comes time to deliver, when you're getting close, and again, for us, like I couldn't tell you the exact date of when they're going to deliver just because, you know, for us, the way we do it, it happens when it happens. But again, over the years, just some things to look for. I mean, one, just in the behavior of the goat, you can tell they're getting close. I mean, also they're going to be filled up. Their milk, we've had some goats where their milk comes in like in the last couple of weeks before they deliver, and we've had some where it's almost like a 6-week buildup. You know, their udder just gets slowly bigger and bigger, you know, until their delivery time. But the udder development is something to look for. But then also just, are they getting restless? Are they pawing at the ground? You know, you can look at their vulva and see if it's swollen or not. You know, and then also another thing to look for is on the back end of a goat, you know, their tail ligaments, like around, you can almost wrap your fingers, like if this is their spine, you know, you can take your fingers and like almost touch your fingers underneath their spine. They're going to be so loose. Which is a good sign they're getting ready to deliver. And then really probably the ultimate sign, at least for us, has been seeing that mucus plug. You know, and if they've got that hanging out, normally within a day or so, you know, there's babies out. So those are things to look for, you know, when they're getting close to delivering. As far as the care for the goat, hopefully by this point, they're already healthy. Their parasite load is fairly low. You know, and everything's going good for the mama. So what we'll do is we actually built these 2 stalls in our barn, and then we sectioned them off in half. And so we actually have, you know, out of the 2 12 by 12 stalls, we made it into 4 6 by 12 stalls that we can use. And so when they're getting close to delivering, we like to bring our goats in here, and so they'll have like fresh hay or fresh straw for their flooring, and then they have their own water, their own minerals, their own feed. There'll be heat lamps if it's really cold, you know, and we've just found just giving them like the best location possible to have birth seems to minimize any complications, and we haven't had any significant losses through that. Our sheep, on the other hand, you know, they deliver out in the field, other than the one that we had an issue with a vaginal prolapse last year. The other sheep, they deliver out there in the field, and they're fine and so much hardier than the goats are. But again, we like to give the mamas her own space, and she's close to everybody too, so she doesn't feel like she's alone. Let's see here. Other than that, and another reason for that too is like, in the winter months, which typically is when our goats deliver, it's normally, it may not be 20 degrees, but it could be 40 or so. But, you know, goats will tend to like kind of huddle up when it's cold. And so we've actually had this happen twice now, where we left the babies in there and all the goats huddled up to keep warm at night, and the baby ended up on the bottom of the pile, suffocated and died. That happened the first time for us probably 4 years ago. And it was like a 2-week-old baby, so it was still really small. But then, you know, and so that's when we started building these to give the mamas space and their own, you know, little place to have their babies with heat lamps and everything, so they're warm. But then we had it probably 2 years ago. It happened again where the baby was actually like 5 or 6 weeks old at this point, which I thought was plenty old enough, and I didn't have to worry about that. And then, of course, I come down here, and one of her babies was at the bottom of the pile, dead. So that's something to think about when you're raising goats. It's only happened those 2 times for us, but you know, 1 time is enough. That when that happens, you want to do what you can to prevent that, and so that's why we have these birthing stalls here. And then also they double as like if we have a goat that gets sick and we need to separate them from the herd and get them, either monitor them closely or give them whatever medications or extra supplements or anything that they need, we can put them in here and separate them and give them the best care possible that we can do for them. You know, and so for 10 months out of the year, these stalls are mostly empty, but during birthing season, they're really nice to have. And they're right here in the barn where we have access to the water and everything else, so it's easy to to be able to take care of them. You know, and then hopefully you have healthy deliveries and babies, and you know, and then springtime is like such a fun time because you got all the babies running around, and baby goats are so fun just to hang out with. They're spunky, they're playful, they're excited, you know, and so just getting to kind of hang out with them is really a joy in raising goats. So I know that I covered a lot of information in this video, but if there's something that I forgot, just feel free to drop it below in the comments and I'll be happy to answer it. And I wish you the best of luck raising your own goats. You know, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.